Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this session on Afghanistan. My name is Lyse Doucet. I am a BBC presenter and correspondent. I have been reporting on Afghanistan since 1988, the last years of the Soviet military presence when I went to live in Afghanistan. I must unfortunately begin with an apology to all of you, and most of all to the panelists, that our session, the timing of our session had to be changed at very short notice. Now, I know journalism is often an excuse for bad manners, but in this case, and we are still investigating whether it was a bird that hit a plane at Heathrow or the plane hit the bird at Heathrow, either way, my flight was delayed for a few hours and therefore I couldn't make it. On the other hand, you could look at the facts of this case, that the Afghan session, which was in the morning, then had to move to the lovely hour of 6 o'clock. And the Russian session, which was at this great hour, moved to the ungodly hour of 9 o'clock. And there is that Afghan Pashto expression, which is, 100 years is too early to take revenge. So, and as we say in my business, it is the story that's too good to check. But now to Afghanistan, 2013, 2014. It is a truism in Afghanistan to say that every year is a critical year. But even by that standard, these 2 years in Afghanistan are absolutely critical. It is also a very sad reality of Afghanistan for the Afghan people that with every new phase of their tortuous history, they're always hoping that the next phase will be better than the last. But sadly, they have been all too often disappointed. 2014 will, of course, everyone here will know, the year when the bulk of US-led NATO forces will pull out, including, of course, the Estonian contingent. But it is also, and I think for many Afghans, this is almost the most important event of 2014, there will be another presidential election. Whether that is considered free and fair, or to use a better word, whether the process and the result is seen as legitimate, will have a very crucial bearing on the immediate future of Afghanistan. That is what we would like to focus for the next hour and a half in this session. We have a terrific panel to help us ask some critical questions and also bring us some important answers. Beginning with my old friend Shukria Barakzai, who has been a member of parliament, the lower house of the Afghan parliament, since 2005. In 2002, she set up a Afghan women's magazine, Ayna Izan, Women's Mirror. She has been a leading journalist and a leading advocate for women's rights. She also is on the Defense and Security Committee of the Afghan Parliament. Ahmed Rashid has been writing with affection and authority, not just on Pakistan, but also Afghanistan and Central Asia for many years, with seminal books that I think many of you will have read, the book on the Taliban, the book on jihad in Central Asia, and 2 recent absolutely important books on Pakistan as well. Welcome to Ahmed Rashid. From Kabul, joining us is Vygaudas Ušackas, who has been the EU Special Representative, the head of the EU delegation in Kabul, former Lithuanian foreign minister. Those of you who know him well will know he's a good golfer. He's also a very good diplomat. Okay, maybe not so good. Also a very good diplomat. He has personified that expression, we are with you for the long run. He has been in this post since 2010, which I think is longer than most envoys in Afghanistan. And last but not least, in case you are worried that these are all very woolly worded politicians and pundits, we have a mathematician. And on top of that, a Russian mathematician who's going to give us some precision, we hope. Andrei Piontkovsky he's a senior fellow at the Institute, I've got to get this right, of Systems Study at the Russian Academy of Scientists. He's also a fellow at the Hudson Institute and an author as well. Welcome to all of you. Let me start, as protocol should dictate, but I think also in terms of content. Shukria Barakzai, each will begin by speaking. They will all set out some introductory remarks, and then we would like to open the conversation, because I know in the audience we have people who have been engaged and concerned about Afghanistan for a long time as well. Shukria Barakzai.
Thank you very much, Lyse, and thank you. I came here not to deliver a message from Afghanistan, to just put you on the picture what's going on in Afghanistan. At the grave of empires, it was something which is, the question comes to my mind, is that an excuse or a lesson for others? Which is yet, I don't know. 2014 is important for the Afghans, and I believe for the region and the country. First, because of we would like to have a very democratic political transformation through to the election, which is according to Constitution, President Ahmed Rashid cannot run anymore for presidency. The second, with all these withdrawal, the development aid is going down, which is, it has already been decreased. And the economic crisis has already been stopped, but for sure 2014 is more challengeable. 2014 is important for Afghanistan because of the number of the foreign troops will going to be very limited. And the Afghan ANSF, Afghan National Security Forces, will be responsible for the country, security, and sovereignty. Psychologically, going on country, post-war country, country which has had the experience of being badly marginalized, it's really a big disaster for the public opinion. They will think we will go back to the dark age, which is we never like to. At the meantime, we believe it's maybe 2014 will be a good opportunity. It's also possible. Why? We will have the new government settlement, which is, we hope and we would like and we support to come by the election. The second, self-confidence and capacity building among the Afghan National Security Force, which is, they are showing and practicing every day a wonderful job, it will increase. And their popularity among the people as well. Supporting democracy, because Afghanistan was leading by coup d'etat after one after another. So the political peacefully transmission will be one of the projects, democratic projects, which is we believe. And also maybe 2014 will be a good opportunity. Because right now the scandal of the corruption, weak governments, the lack of implementation of the law, human rights, and all other problems which is on the table, it will maybe vacuumed somehow if we had good, fair, inclusive election. Beside of that election, if the real people in Afghanistan will get the chance to go vote, and also to making a line between good and bad. But some problems we may not solve by 2014. Like, Taliban threat will be still remaining as a threat. It means peace and negotiation was not a successful political project. Second, the opium's money, hundreds of billions of dollars per year, in international market. Would you think this drug money will be down? No. This manufacture will still work and exist as a big challenge for the Afghans. The Afghan relationship with their neighbor countries, in particular Pakistan and Iran, is not really in the right direction. And the problems will not solve because we are not asking our neighbors to do something for us. The only thing we are asking is, leave us. We want to be ourselves. very simple demand, not something. The corruption still will exist because this is the nature of third world countries. Beside of that, the lack of security will be some of the very critical issue. The issue of human rights, other civilian rights like freedom of speech and women's rights will be also a big question. Who will be the winner of the next election? Do they will respect or reject? We don't know yet. But at the meantime, let me tell you, with all these problems and challenges, which we are facing every single day in Afghanistan, Afghanistan is important, not only for Afghans, for your countries too. I am the generation of, which is my generation, was been victim. Why? Because of your policy. Those whom today you are labeling extremism, they made by your factory. Those whom today, which is I'm suffering from them by the name of warlord, it's made by you. Those whom they are fighting and burning our schools, it's not Afghan product, starting from their ideology till their activity. So that's why I'm not here to deliver a message on behalf of Afghan people. I just give you a picture. I hope this panel will take us to the destiny to better way for better future for Afghans.
Thank you, Shukria. I think that's what Gramsci, with his phrase of optimism of the will and pessimism of the intellect, for any society, you would say that the deck is stacked against Afghanistan. You talked about, you referred to the problems with the neighbors, the problems on the economy, just in an empirical sense, the money is going to drop down. Any country would find it hard to deal with it, and yet the hope of Afghans that this is an opportunity. Mm-hmm. If I could be, I know you're not a betting woman, but on balance, would you say, are you more worried than hopeful, or vice versa, as you head into this critical period?
I don't want to say that I'm worried. I just only believe I should use the opportunity for better future. Because if my worry will not change anything, it will not change the minds of Obama or the pocket of the US Congress or the minds and setup of the NATO timetable. The only thing is, may change, it's if they're repeating again the mistake, which is leaving Afghanistan as 90s, maybe they will come back with triple price and more casualty than 2001. Maybe, because what is my belief? I believe Afghanistan war is not only Afghans' war. This is we have shared enemy. We are facing shared enemy. And our sex is also shared if we believe the same values. So that's why this time we need to think twice. Leaving Afghanistan, staying Afghanistan, forgetting about Afghanistan. This is the question which is we really need to find an answer to not make more mass and mistakes. We shouldn't repeat the same mistakes, historical mistakes particular, which has happened since 35 years in Afghanistan.
A lot of onus on Afghans. Let me just get a sense of what the people here think, because I'm sure everyone here has a view on this. If I ask people to show with your hands, let us to use the expression about glass half empty or half full, how many of you in the audience think that Afghanistan going forward, let's say we're now speaking in January 2015, how many do you think in Afghanistan the glass will be half full rather than half empty? How many of you are more on the positive than on the negative side? And how many of you are on the negative side?
Oh.
Wow.
And how many of you are like me, you're like this, thinking it hangs in the balance? Okay, well, let's see if our panelists can convince you to change your mind in the way. We've heard a perspective from an Afghan who's very engaged in Afghan society and politics and culture. Let's go to you, Vygaudas, to see where you stand on this, because you've seen it close up for several years now.
Well, I want to disappoint the pessimists.
Good, we love that.
Because
how European of you.
If you're not an optimist, there is nothing to do in this world, especially in the part where I'm representing European Union. But I mean, in all seriousness, I think, first of all, we have to acknowledge that a lot of progress has been made in the course of the last 12 years in Afghanistan, thanks to both suffering, sacrifices, but also a hugely important investment we all made together, be it in the health sector, be it in improved but not sufficient situation for women's rights, be it in education, where the girls can go to the schools, which was not the case in 2001. Having said this, we also have to be honest that all these accomplishments are still fragile and reversible. And in order to make that irreversible, it will require staying power demonstration from all of us, from the international community who have been engaged in Afghanistan. It will require greater regional buy-in of the neighbors, especially Pakistan, but also Iran and India. But first and foremost, it will require the ownership and leadership of Afghan people. And that's why I think one of the most significant and positive outcomes of the 2014, and I must admit that I was personally very concerned about the date, which was politically driven, established by NATO and international community. But I think the most important outcome of the 2014 is that people like Shukria are taking over leadership of the country. There is no more time for the Afghans to be complacent. We've been throwing huge amounts of money with not sufficient accountability and with a lack of the leadership. Now the time is ticking, and they have to take over by themselves. And that's what is happening as we speak when they prepare themselves for the elections. We're going to be supporting them financially when it comes to conduct of the elections. But it's going to be the Afghans themselves who have to make the Afghan kind of deals which would produce legitimate outcome for the future government of Afghanistan. I think we also have to draw the lessons from the past. And first lesson, which Shukria has mentioned, we cannot afford to make mistakes of 2089 or 92, when the West turned back to Afghanistan, which produced then the source for international terrorism and 9/11. Secondly, we'll all have to draw the lessons and to learn how to do more with less. Because political attention is shifting where Lyse Doucet is reporting from. It's Syria, it's elections in Pakistan and Middle East. And also there is a fatigue among the population and the taxpayers in our countries. Thirdly, of course, we have to take our commitments, which were made of truly exceptional nature, both in Chicago and in Tokyo, much more seriously. In Tokyo, international community had committed $16.1 billion for the next 3 years, which is far larger amount of money any country similar to Afghanistan is receiving. But we made those commitments conditioned on the 5 critical areas. First is the conduct of inclusive and transparent elections, which would produce legitimate outcome in 2014. It's about the Afghan government coping with the corruption. It's about Afghan society appreciating and promoting human rights, especially women's rights. But it's also about the Afghans doing very simple things which are critical for its own future self-sustainable development, putting in place conducive legislative framework for foreign and local investment to come to Afghanistan, to tap the immense resources of natural wealth in the country, be it gold, gas, oil, lithium, or you name, or rare stones, which is still not the case, because we made them complacent to a large extent, and now the game changes is happening. Secondly, I think we all recognize that Afghanistan's security puzzle cannot be solved in isolation, and neighbors will have to be involved in that. Meanwhile, to secure Afghanistan, Pakistan will need to be involved. Both Afghanistan and Pakistan have demonstrated an increasing appreciation of the interdependence and the need to address the root causes of conflict and tackle fundamentalism collectively. These are positive signs. However, building conducive relationship, especially between very close and complex neighbors, is not an easy task. It will require a sense of pragmatism. It will also require both countries to avoid public recriminations and accusations against each other. Elections in Pakistan have demonstrated the democratic gains in this country. The new Prime Minister, or incoming Prime Minister, Nawaz Sharif, seeks to improve ties and making rapprochement with India a cornerstone of his policy. I think this, along with a more constructive engagement of China, using the leverage of all-weather relationship with Pakistan and incoming investment into Afghanistan, may play a positive role in shaping a new regional paradigm based on greater economic interdependence, getting the resources from Central Asia into the huge markets of South Asia, and putting in place steps towards trust and confidence. All in all, yes, we made a lot of progress. It's still challenging to move forward. It will require the leadership of the Afghan and accountability. The conflict for international community may end by the end of 2014, but the root causes of the conflict, which is fundamentalism, radicalism, illiteracy and poverty, might persist. And for that cause, we will need to demonstrate staying power. And the Afghans need to reciprocate with the steps I mentioned to you, bettering governance, conducting elections, putting in place conducive economic policies. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vygaudas. You mentioned a number of the critical challenges, and some of them are similar to what Shukria mentioned. But what would you say is at the top of your in tray in terms of what worries you the most? Is it, for example, the issue of Afghan elections? Because I think the closer we get to April 2014, Afghanistan, like any country, the political elite will be almost exclusively focused on that. And as you know, there's already tensions between how much international engagement there will be in terms of organization and supervision, and what will be, how will Afghans be able to organize it? What is at the top of your mind in terms of that concern?
Well, at the top of the mind, first and foremost, for us as international community, is that we have, first of all, a legal framework in place, with institutions in place to conduct the elections. We need to have a Chief Justice appointed, who has been occupying the office for the last 2 years illegally against the Constitution, beyond the term of Constitution. We have to have independent election commission in place. But equally, and that's what is rewarding and encouraging, is to see that the conversation is taking place among the Afghan political players, both within establishment and the opposition, in designing the policies, what kind of Afghanistan they want to see, and who and how is going to be selected as the candidates for Afghanistan, for the presidential elections. It won't be easy. We're still going to have a lot of security challenges, and that's where the involvement and role of Pakistan will be important to provide the space, security space for the elections. And all the stakeholders, I think it's also important to acknowledge that elections in Afghanistan next year is going to be a truly national project, for which all the stakeholders, not only president, not only the government, but also the parliament, the opposition, civic society, and the media, will have to play a role in creating security, legal space to cast a vote. And we will be supporting financially.
Okay, I'm sure we'll have more questions on the elections. I'm going to hand it over to Ahmed Rashid now.
Thank you. It's a very great pleasure to be here, and I thank the organizers for inviting me. What I'm going to do is, first of all, let me just say that I don't think anybody is in a position to predict as to what is going to happen in Afghanistan after 2014. I don't think the Americans, NATO, the European Union, nor the Afghans can say what will happen. That's the first thing. And Afghans remember very well that when the Soviets left Afghanistan in 1989, the CIA gave 3 weeks for the Najibullah regime to fall, the Afghan communist regime to fall. And he lasted 3 years. And everybody had it totally wrong. So nobody wants to. But the thing I really want to stress is that I think there are 4 or 5 major issues which the West could have fulfilled, and instead it has kind of abandoned the Afghans at this stage, which has really, in my opinion, deteriorated the situation further. The first is the issue of elections. The West has deliberately undermined its own leverage over these elections, which were essential if they were going to be free and fair. President Karzai has been entrusted with appointing almost all the key players in the election commission and the monitoring group. In the last elections, there were UN monitors who had a very decisive voice in saying whether they were rigged or not rigged. And my biggest fear is that these elections will be rigged, just as they were last time. And there are all sorts of reasons for that. The government side President Karzai cannot stand again, but he will be he will be putting his hand on and a blessing on, a successor who will he will want elected. And there's every chance that the government side will be rigging the elections. And there's also a very high chance, what happened in 2008, that the non-Pashtuns in the north will also rig the elections for their particular candidates or single candidate. Now, in 2008, if you remember what happened, there was a standoff between Karzai and the leading opposition figure, Dr. Abdullah. And it was almost an impossible situation. And finally, Abdullah backed down, which led to an easing of the situation. But the fact that the election had been rigged really raised this question of legitimacy of the Karzai regime, which has plagued it ever since. Now, this time, I can assure you, the non-Pashtuns in the north are not going to back down. If they feel that there's a rigged election, they're going to confront Karzai, the government, and Karzai's successor, whoever it may be. And that is a very dangerous situation. And the West, at that point in time, will have reduced its troops drastically. The UN has eliminated the Security Council has eliminated the UN role in many parts of the elections, which it played, 5 years ago. And nobody is going to be in a position to really have leverage over the warlords, Karzai, etc. And this is, I think, causing immense heartache amongst the Afghans. Who is going to be the monitor for these elections? There is no monitor for these elections. That's the first thing. The second issue, and this was eminently doable if we had not retreated in the way that we have retreated. The second point is the talks with the Taliban. As you know, 2 years ago, talks started between the Americans and the Taliban under Richard Holbrooke, who was then running AFPAC, the desk in the State Department. And there was immense hope that this would eventually lead to some kind of confidence-building measures between the two sides and a ceasefire, perhaps in the war, and then eventually talks with Karzai, and there was a sort of game plan. None of that happened. Now, a very heavy reason for that not happening was the American decision not to fulfill the promises they had made, particularly regarding the freeing of 5 Taliban prisoners from Guantanamo. The complete absence of President Obama or involvement in any of the support that was needed from the White House for the US diplomats and the State Department that was involved in this. And this followed even after Holbrooke's death, when another diplomat took over his job. There was even less support from the White House for these negotiations. Now, and the negotiations then collapsed, and the Taliban said, well, I'm sorry, if you're not delivering, we're not delivering either, and both sides walked away. That situation has now gone on for 18 months. Now, what has happened in the meantime is that, of course, given the dynamics of an insurgency, what I call the peace lobby in the Taliban has dissipated. And instead, the hardliners, who were in a minority at one stage, are today in the ascendance. And they're basically saying, we should fight, and we should take Kabul, and we should defeat the Karzai regime, and we should go back to square one. So again, a huge lost opportunity, when what was needed was an American policy that would strengthen this peace lobby by perhaps giving some concessions and gaining some concessions in return. And thirdly, I think it was absolutely essential that we should have worked towards a ceasefire by 2014 between the Taliban and the US and Afghan forces. I think there's enormous skepticism about the Afghan security forces, rightly so. I mean, the massive degree of illiteracy, desertion rate, etc. But the most important aspect is, if we are expecting this very untutored, untrained Afghan army to take the job of the Western forces and continue fighting the Taliban as if there's no break, is absurd. Yes, if this Afghan army, if there'd been a ceasefire, and you were asking this Afghan army to keep law and order, keep security, do guard duty, etc., they would have done that. That was That is within their capability. But I don't see a confrontation. What I do see happening very quickly, and what happened very quickly, after the Soviets left, the Taliban are likely to take a lot of the countryside in the south and the east of the country. And the Afghan army is not going to be in a position to push them out of that area. The third thing is the other thing that started with Holbrooke, and in fact, unfortunately petered out completely, was this idea of a regional compact. It was desperately needed that, given the history of the interference of the neighbors in Afghanistan's affairs, that there had to be a US-led and eventually perhaps sanctioned by the UN Security Council, but a US-led move to try and get the neighbors together and to agree to a non-interference agreement on Afghanistan. And we are further away from that than ever before. There's no question now that, individual states are trying to work out compacts with some other individual states, but it's not something that's a coherent whole. The issue of Pakistan. The Taliban leadership is almost entirely based in Pakistan. And it has been for a very long time. And President Karzai has been pointing this out for a very long time, and it's proved immensely detrimental to Pakistan. We now have the Pakistani Taliban, who in fact, in many ways, are far more lethal than the Afghan Taliban. The strategy, the US strategy to Pakistan was has been either chronic appeasement or chronic punishment, in the latter period of the Obama period, where literally, the CIA treated the ISI as an enemy, and the two militaries treated each other literally as an enemy. Now, both extremes of policy have been wrong and have not worked. And I think there is a shift now in the military thinking in Pakistan, and they are fully aware that the threat now is not India, it's not Afghanistan, the threat is internal. An internal collapse is what is, quite feasible for Pakistan, God forbid, but it could happen. And I think part of that, trying to resolve that, is a greater agreement amongst the generals that, we need to fix Afghanistan, or we need to help the international community fix Afghanistan. But what is not happening is the ability of the Pakistani leadership to actually take the initiative and do something. Because they do have an enormous lever in hosting the Taliban leadership. And if we do not use this lever in a positive way, I'm Pakistani, if we do not use this lever in a positive way, we're going to lose all support, not just from the West, but all the neighbors are fed up also. We're very isolated in the neighborhood, which includes Iran, India, Central Asia, China, even the Arab countries. Are frustrated because of the growth of Al-Qaeda, the presence still of Ayman al-Zawahiri, the number 2 of Al-Qaeda there, etc., etc. Fourthly, I just want to touch on, I agree a great deal has been achieved, but what has not been achieved in 12 years of a Western presence has been the building of an indigenous economy. You are leaving Afghanistan without an economy. Even the minimal kind of economy that existed under Zahir Shah's time in the 1970s, where Afghanistan exported some $400 million worth of fruit and vegetables and nuts and karakul and furs and things like that. Even that minimal sort of export-based economy has not been revived in any substantial way. And the bulk of the economic progress that we have seen have been those Afghans who've been employed, tens of thousands of them, who've been employed by the Western forces. Obviously, these guys are all going to be losing their jobs, and what exactly, where they're going to go, what they're going to do. And as you said, this is the cream of the cream, in the sense that these are educated, these are modern, they believe in democracy, they're anti-Taliban. This is exactly the kind of the beginnings of an Afghan middle class that you wanted to promote right from day one. And they're going to be, they're there now, but they're going to be jobless come 2014. And that is something also that could have been avoided. So I just want to stress that, I'm not giving up, because people say, well, now nothing's going to happen till 2014, and the next, it's May now, we're talking about, next May, say, the next 12 months, nothing's going to happen. Well, I still think there's time. There's time for a resumption of talks with the Taliban, if the Americans are serious and Obama gets serious about it. I think there's time for a resumption of the getting some control over these elections and ensuring some kind of non-rigging, non-interference by the executive in these elections. I think there is time for helping Pakistan take some initiatives with the Afghan Taliban, which are there. I think there's even time to do some right things for the economy, despite all the corruption and all the rest of it. But what worries me most of all, I think there's a sense that you mentioned, and you mentioned that there would be money coming. I fear if Afghanistan goes down the tubes, as it were, I think that money will stop. Congress is already in no mood to give more money to Afghanistan, despite the promises made. And I think that's the mood in the European parliaments as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ahmed Rashid. You made some very strong remarks on elections, and I think, Vygaudas, since you're involved, we'll have the right of reply. We'll return to all of these questions, so we're going to keep those in mind and save them both for your response and an audience response. Let me just ask you one question, Ahmed. You concluded by saying you're not giving up, including on the resumptions of some kind of talks, conversation with the Taliban. But what do you say to those? Well, first of all, no one we speak to thinks that there's going to be a resumption of substantial dialogue in the months which rest. And there are many who say that despite what you described as the peace lobby, that a lot of the Taliban were not interested in any kind of dialogue. They're going to wait out the withdrawal of the bulk of troops. And that what they were really interested in talking about with the Americans was getting their prisoners out of Guantanamo Bay. What do you think is going to happen then if there isn't, as people expect, some kind of a deal and understanding? Do you think they are going to be able to take more territory, have a growing presence in many parts of Afghanistan? What will be the impact of a lack of some kind of a deal or understanding?
I think in many ways we'll see history repeat itself. Najibullah lasted for 3 years. The next president can probably last for 3 or 4 or 5 years even, maybe. But, we will have a situation where the country will be deeply divided. The Taliban will hold enormous amounts of territory. They will not be able to take the major cities or probably the road networks, the important road networks, which will still be secured by the. But increasingly, there will be this. There will be the. Afghanistan will remain a completely unsafe, haven, where again Al Qaeda and other terrorist groups can return to, and also destabilizing the region. The growth of the Pakistani Taliban, growth of, we discussed last night, the growth of the extremist groups into Central Asia, who are already massing in northern Afghanistan to try and enter back into Central Asia and recreate the mayhem they did in the 90s there. So, all bets are off. And the Taliban can sustain a stalemate for the next 2 to 3 years without any problem. Their needs and their equipment and all the rest of it that they will continue to get. Now, critical to that, of course, is, is Pakistan going to continue giving them a safe haven? And is Pakistan in a position to kick them out? No, it's not. Pakistan can't kick them out. They're far too strong to be kicked out. And that could unite all the extremist forces in Pakistan to take on the army and civil society, which would be disastrous.
Okay, and Shukria had hinted at the beginning about people are saying now the decisions that are taken by Afghan leaders and society which will push Afghanistan further toward the real threat of civil war or actually pull it back from that brink. We'll return to that. I promised you a clever mathematician, and so here he is, Andrei Piontkovsky, with your last intervention. Thank you.
Thank you, Liz. As Madam Deputy reminded us, Afghanistan is such a neuralgic point that its future affects all of us. Not only neighboring country, but may affect global balance of forces, which already happens about 20 years ago. The Afghan adventure was not the only, but, sorry.
Another conspiracy against the Russians. They just never stop. Please go ahead.
If I just keep it.
Why don't you put it on your put it on your shirt?
KGB.
I know.
It's the KGB.
There's not enough microphones these days, you know. Sorry, Andrei. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
The Afghan adventure was not the only, but one of the main contributing factors to the collapse of the Soviet Union. So if we use this metaphor, graveyard of empire, it's more applicable to the Soviet Empire than to any other. It's no wonder that the future of Afghanistan is now a hotspot discussed in Moscow. As colleague noted, it's very difficult, almost impossible to predict the future. But one thing seems to me certain under any scenario, irrespectively of results of elections, of results of talks between Taliban and central government. The influence of Taliban and other Islamistic radical organization and movement, the influence, the power, the prestige will certainly increase. First of all, psychologically, not for all their foes in other countries. The mere fact of withdrawal of coalition or considerable reducing of coalition from Afghanistan will be perceived by radicals in other countries as a defeat, as another defeat of the West, and another victory of radical movement. And the key question for neighbors, and I mean it certainly from a Russian perspective, they are more interested in what will happen in Central Asian Republic. The key question is to what extent this new level of influence will be projected on this country. As you already justly note, there are all ingredients ready in Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan for a kind of Islamic revolution. Corrupted secular regimes, demographic explosion, mass unemployment of youth, demodernization of the country. Well, comparing with the Soviet period of this, certainly demodernization of industry, of science, education, all this negative development. So let's hope for positive scenario, but analyze negative. An evident negative, a quite plausible scenario is just one that was prevented by events of 2001. Because the main concern in Russia at that time was that Northern Alliance will about to be overcome by Taliban, and the radical movements will move to Central Asia, to Russia's southern underbelly. And I remember there was a lot of discussion in 2000, 2001, a lot of statement of very top Russian official, Mr. Ivanov, for example, defense minister at the time, that we are planning to bomb Taliban, we're planning to send 100,000 troops in Central Asia. It was absolutely unrealistic plans at the time when all our combat-ready troops were locked in Chechnya. But it perceived as a very serious threat, which was stopped by Western intervention. And I don't know, the results of 12 years of NATO presence in Afghanistan are questionable from the point of view of Western security. But for Russia, they did a very good job. They prevented, in spite of all denouncing of NATO occupation of Afghanistan, and so on, people in Kremlin realized that NATO is waging Russian war. They are, for the first time in our history, somebody made a dirty job for us. Usually it was vice versa. And what will happen now if, under this scenario, inspired by perceived success of Taliban in Afghanistan, or maybe helped by material and by human capitals, the radical elements in these republics will present a serious threat to their shaky states and government. Well, I have a news for you. I don't know welcome or not, but I may predict one thing. Even in the worst case scenario in Central Asia, Russian troops will not be deployed to this area. Maybe advisors, maybe technicians, but not Russian troops. And I explain you why. It will be fiercely opposed by Russian society, not by usual suspects, not by liberals, Democrats, human rights activists, peacenik, all this kind of people who protested against Chechnya. It will be opposed by a rising force of Russian ethnic nationalism. During the last 2-3 years, a Copernicus-type revolution has happened inside Russian nationalism, absolutely unnoticed yet in the West. Traditionally, Russian nationalism was imperial. Russia should expand more. After experience of this latest Caucasus War, which de facto Kremlin lost, we lost war in Chechnya. Mr. Kadyrov enjoying more independence than Dudaev and Maskhadov could dream of. Borova, we're paying huge indemnities to him through federal, but just to make him to pretend that he is loyal to Putin and to Russia. And under the influence of this experience, this new generation of Russian nationalism, they want not expansion, but shrinking of empire. Their dream is to get rid of Chechnya, Dagestan, Ingushetia. So politically, it will be impossible to send troops to Central. It's not my prediction for tomorrow. It's a reality of today. Because the only point of agreement between such absolutely opposing force in Russia, like Putin government and coordinated committee from opposition, is visa regime for Central Asia Republic. And well, Putin is still continuing to talk blah about Eurasian Union. But by new measures of border control with this republic, he's killing this mere idea. So, in this case, what will be the future of Central Bloc? Will the Islamists triumphantly march through Central Asia? Not at all. Not at all. Because after Roman, British, American, Soviet and American empire, another empire, reluctantly or not, enters the great game of Central Asia, Chinese empire. Because Chinese will never reconcile themselves with Islamization, radical Islamization of Central Asia, on economic reasons, because they regard Central Asia as a reservoir of their energy supply, on geopolitical reasons, and on internal policy, the Xinjiang region with their own Islamists. So in case of this Islamization of Afghanistan and projection of this tendency to the center, I say we face a tectonic geopolitical shift.
But what could bring Afghanistan back from that brink? I mean, for example, this week there was a Taliban attack right in the center of Kabul, and at the end of the day, people said Afghan security forces performed well, and that had an impact on the mood in the city. They said our Afghan army and Afghan police responded to the challenge. If that happened across Afghanistan, if there were elections which were not perfect but seen as legitimate, could that push back what you were talking about, rising prestige and prominence of the Islamist?
Well, but our Pakistan friends just explained us that the United States and West are doing everything to facilitate this scenario and to undermine prospect of positive development.
Okay. Now,
Lyse, can I add something?
Yes.
It's maybe one of the questions we may also raise. Let me tell you why Afghanistan will not reverse back to the dark age, either to the civil war or to the Taliban regime. This is, I believe, as someone I lost my 2 kids during the civil war. And today I'm a lawmaker under one roof with the people they killed my child. At that time, they don't have zero interest on the city. They destroy everything. And let me quote Mr. Nawaz Sharif. In 1993, he said, "My biggest achievement was I destroyed the Afghanistan army." And my first message after he officially would be announced that they are the winner of the Pakistan election, I say, this is not 1993. Don't dream that Afghanistan back. Even not on a dream. The reality is something else. The new generation of Afghanistan, they've been suffered in different countries, in Pakistan, in Iran. Still, we have large number of refugees over there. But when they come, they contribute. If you see the Taliban is not that big power. We make them to be very enlarged. If they had the power, why they didn't control a single province out of 34 provinces in 10 years' time? Why they are doing suicide? Suicide is not the enemy they are doing from the PowerPoint. This is the most weak point for them. Because they are selecting individuals, even they can buy, and make people to go and do suicide. We had lots of interviews been recorded, a child say, he was only 14 years old guy. He said, Taliban give me the vest and say, go and do suicide, and then run away. Imagine how they're brainwashing the people, someone doesn't understood there will be nobody after suicide. Beside of that, the new Afghan generation will not let the country to go back to the dark age. The 1995, when Taliban took power in Afghanistan, we've been suffered from the civil war. We've been suffered from the ethnic war. We've been suffered from all those crimes, particularly war crimes, which has happened at that time. What was the most important for the people like us at that time? Having just a small peace of mind. And later on, we saw we got peace. It means no war, but there's no rights, no justice, no education. So nothing. Even it's not be a prison. Worse than the social life was worse than prisons. That's why people live back the country. But right now, this is not Afghanistan in 1992. This is not Afghanistan in 1995. This is Afghanistan in 2014, which is first, the Afghans wants to be a decision maker by the legitimate election. The second, the new Afghan generation and population would like to assure and to achieve what we lost it. And the third, the all strategic partnership agreement that Afghanistan has, we account that one as a very valuable document that we will not be alone. They will stand with us when we need them. When it comes to the Taliban and peace process, let me add some of the things. Thank you, Mr. Rashid, that you say that my Afghan soldiers, illiterate and capable, is fighting a very professional, well-trained Talib, which is got from the ISI well-trained Taliban, which is their activity, or in Afghanistan. I believe in Afghanistan is not war between Afghans. If you see all the people which is fighting inside of Afghanistan, I'm sorry to say and name those countries which is they are really present in Afghanistan. Chechnya, there's a Chechenese fighters, there's a Uzbek fighters, there's a Tajik fighters, there's a Pakistani Punjabi fighters, there's a fighters from Arab countries. Why my neighbor country will be a safe haven for all those bad guys, which is their country, don't call them back or have them back? This is a big threat, I believe, the extremism. And the center of extremism, it could be a big threat for the future of Afghanistan.
Okay, well put. So you hear this a lot in Afghanistan about we don't want to move back. With your permission, there seems to me that the questions fall into various areas. And rather than us jumping around, if you're happy with this, we're going to deal with the questions. If someone has let's go to start about the politics, including elections. And I'm going to take some questions on that. From there, we'll move to broadly security questions and Taliban, to regional, and then to other questions, so that our panelists can grapple with an issue. So if anyone has a question, and I will come to the questions in turn, a question on, broadly speaking, the elections, because you have to respond to, I think was a fair point by Ahmed Rashid about the international community pulling back on some important questions and actually being pushed back by the Afghans as well on elections. So on elections and political process in general, let's take a few questions. This gentleman here.
I'm İlter Turan from Istanbul Bilgi University. Let's assume for the moment that we have the most honest elections ever held in the world, in Afghanistan. Would all sides necessarily recognize the outcome? Another way of maybe asking the same question would be, do all Afghanis feel to be a part of the same political community that are willing to accept the outcomes of a fairly elected competition? Or are there some who actually do not think so, and others who will accept the outcome only if the outcome is to their liking? Okay. So this is one question.
Just if you want to just keep one question, and then just so we have a bit democracy. But we'll return to you. Yes?
All right.
Peter? Yeah.
Well, I would like, Peter Semneby, Swedish ambassador in Kabul. I would like to pick up on Shukria's last comment about the societal changes and also how they relate to the election. It seems that the jockeying for influence and power and positioning before the election has brought forward again some of the more retrograde forces in Afghan society, the local regional power brokers, warlords, the jihad generation, as it were, those that you talked about that you're sitting under the same roof in parliament with. This seems to obviously, this carries some risks. It means that since these forces are locally based, you will have a fragmentation. You may run the risk of having precisely what İlter Turan was talking about here, that we have different political environments emerging in the country, in different parts of the country. But it also involves a risk in terms of jeopardizing the generational change that is underway in Afghanistan. I've been very much impressed myself by a lot of the young people who have been educated over the course of the last decade or so, who are open to the world. They see Afghanistan in a larger context than the very isolated, insular context that has been traditional in Afghanistan so far. But this generation is not, this generation is, they are in a certain position of influence, but not in a position of power yet. The jihad generation seems, at least in the short run, to strengthen its position. How is this?
If I give you any more time, the next person is going to take even longer. Thank you, but it's a good question.
How is this generational change going to take place, and what are the risks here? Is the young generation...
I'll take one more question on election.
Does it run the risk of being...
We understand your question, Peter. Thank you very much.
Becoming like a jihadist or corrupted?
Okay, this question in the back, yes. Yeah. Sorry, this gentleman here.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Pauli Järvenpää. I used to be Finland's ambassador to Afghanistan. I'm now working here at the organizers, with the organizers ICDS in Tallinn. Shukira, it's a pleasure to see you here in my part of the world. Very short question, brief question. On the sort of jockeying for the presidential candidates. Of course, I used to hear all the rumors and gossip when I was posted in Kabul, but I'm out of it now. So, who are the most likely candidates? Is there a possibility of the coalitions that are quite a few actually? Would they find a Pashtun candidate? Is it only possible for the candidate that is anointed by President Karzai? What's the state of the game now in Kabul?
Thank you. And since you're the ambassador for Finland, you know the answer today will not be the same answer tomorrow to that question. Vygaudas, do you want to take first? Because there's been questions about the system, if you like, and there's questions about the players as well.
Well, first of all, I think it's important to acknowledge that, I mean, we cannot see elections in separation from the rest. And I think, I mean, here I'd like to make first point, in addition to what Ahmed Rashid has been speaking about the lack of progress and involvement with respect to the talks. I believe that elections will provide an opportunity as the withdrawal of most of the bulk of the foreign troops for real talks to start. I don't expect personally that will be results achieved before 2014.
Do you think the elections will help that process?
I think if Afghans manage to have as inclusive and transparent elections as possible, it will open the avenue for real talks. We all know that Afghans talk with everyone. There are different channels of communications. At the moment, the Doha is preferred channel of communications, and that's where Secretary Kerry had made a real effort in getting General Kayani, President Karzai, to Brussels and talking what they need to do collectively to provide some tangible results. We're waiting for the results. But if that will not work, I think some other channels of communication will be used. Having said this, we also have to be honest and remember the Taliban narrative, you have the watch, we have the time. And that's why 2014 is probably seen as a more plausible, or post-2014, more plausible, when you have a new government, a new president with whom the forces insurgency may want to talk, and when we'll have a much lighter footprint of the foreign troops. Having said this, in terms of election organization, I think we also have to recall that there is a certain legacy among the Afghans, especially in the mind of President Karzai, about the previous elections. Read Kayaida's book, and that tells a lot about it. And that's what the President has been insisting, that this time, international community has to have a different presence and different footprint in organizing the elections. Having said this, we all know they will not be able to do by themselves. So they will need to have a financial support, and they'll have to accumulate their own observers through FIFA, but there will be also participation of UNAMA as well. I would anticipate as the EU, as it was the case in Pakistan too.
But could, Ahmed Rashid says you could have pushed harder, even though we know President Karzai is still obsessed about the 2000 election, and with some reason he felt there was a bit too much intrusion, but notwithstanding that, could the international community have pushed harder?
Well, we're pushing hard. We had conversations with President Karzai. He's been responding to some of them. But what is important is not that much that we are pushing them, but the Afghans pushing from within. That's the key. That's the key. And that's what is happening as we speak. That's where the Wolesi Jirga is standing up, like Shukria. That's where you have 22 or already 24 political parties organized under the Cooperation Council of Political Parties and Associations, and they're pushing. And that's where the media is observing and scrutinizing the process, because that's what democracy is all to be about.
Okay. Shukria, do you want to address the issue that Peter rightly raised about generational change, and then also the about the jockeying for position?
Before talking about that, let me put you on more update about the electoral law, and particularly it was been passed on Wednesday from the Parliament, and the rule of procedures for the election campaign and also the complaint committee, which has not been signed by the President. It's been rejected. Why? Because we share the power between President, civil society, political parties. So what was in the law, it was that President cannot appoint. He can go through the list of which has been provided by civil society and experts, and he rejects. But it seems to me in Parliament, because we are campaigning and lobbying for that one, so it will approved by 2/3, and even if the President will not sign, it will be on the official gazette, and the election will conduct on the new laws and new code of conduct for the election campaign and complaint commission. Beside of that, the generation change, I totally agree with you. The new generation is not in the official political power or economic power, but they are, I believe, they are the real power, because they are the one which is they are going to the polling station. So I believe their vote is the great power which is they can use. Maybe Afghanistan will have the headache with the name of these warlords and corrupt guys, and which is so far we call Jang Salar, for more 10 years or 5 years. I wish as soon as we get rid of them, but it may exist more for a couple of more years, but not that strong as they was in 2001 and 2005 and 2009. They will not be in 2014. If you see the indicator, gradually they dropped. Their power had been dropped. They didn't get more power. They lost it. The ministries, the very key positions which is they had at that time. So that's the great hope, and that's give us energy to move forward. According to the candidate, no matter who will be in support by President Karzai, just recently after the Kandahar explosion, Karzai brothers was announced unofficially that his another brother will be a candidate, Mr. Qayyum Karzai, which is he been once upon a time member of parliament with us, but he resigned. He cannot handle this parliamentary work. And the second was the chief of staff of President Karzai, which is he been ambassador of Afghanistan to Iran, and right now he's ambassador to Pakistan. It seems to me he's not counting on Afghans, he's more counting on Iran and Pakistan to succeed the chair. Another but, for the first time in 10 years, the opposition and position, they don't like to walk individual and get entry to this presidential election. They got the idea, no, platform and teamwork is important. And that's why they are creating their own teams. Pashtuns president and two vice president from the other two ethnics, they are trying. But beside of that, there's a group of reformists and intellectuals and elites in the Afghan society and Afghan parties, which is they are trying to give and offer the choice between good and bad among the Afghans, not as it was before between choice between bad and worse that we had in 2005 and 2009.
Okay. We have 15 minutes left, so I want to give people to raise questions on the other issues too. Do you want to say something briefly on the...
Yeah. In answer to the first question about the elections and the Afghan society holding together, I certainly do believe that the Afghans will hold together. But there is one condition, and that is that the elections have to be seen to be legitimate. And they have to not necessarily be legitimate, but be seen to be legitimate. And that the man chosen as the next president comes out of a process of, which the bulk of Afghans see as being legitimate, And if that is the case, then we can. The worst case scenario, of course, is that the elections are rigged, nobody is seen as being legitimate, and we plunge into not just a two-sided civil war as exists at the moment, but a multi-sided civil war with different ethnic groups who, by the way, have all rearmed themselves now in preparation for the Taliban, in preparation for the elections, whatever. So it's a very fragile situation, and this is precisely the moment that the West has chosen to leave the country. And that's what, I think what worries people. I just want to make one point. Very interesting what you said about the new nationalism in Russia. I remember very well in 1992-93, if you remember with Yeltsin, he was trying to reassert Russian influence in Central Asia, and actually there was a public backlash in Russia at that time with Solzhenitsyn's famous quip about Central Asia. Russians did not want to, what they felt was subsidize Central Asia anymore. And they felt that Central Asia was just a dark hole that was, eating up all their resources and all the rest of it. And I mean, maybe but then there was, a return to Russia wanting influence in Central Asia in the mid-90s. And so maybe this thing you're talking about is a phase that is going to pass rather than a permanent
okay, let me just bring in some more questions because you'll be brought in again.
Yes,
just hold on. I'd like to bring the audience in just to give them a chance. And I'm sorry to be a little bit dictatorial. If there are questions about security, Taliban, just so we get a few comments on that from the audience. Yes, I'll in the back. And then we'll take from there. And then Bobo.
Hi, I'm Ela Murabit. I'm the founder of the Voice of Libyan Women. My question relates both to security as well as to the Afghan diaspora, which Shukria had mentioned. What tends to happen in a lot of post-conflict countries or transitional countries is the diaspora comes back, usually with very strong traits and with abilities, however, with very decreased legitimacy or credibility with the local community. And the local community tends to respect or tends to at least appreciate what their own local leaders can do for them. And those tend to be extremist cells, which can actually assist them in terms of education or in terms of security. And I was wondering, because you had mentioned these diaspora coming back from Iran and coming back from other countries, what actual credibility they had and what actual influence they have in Afghanistan, in Afghanistani politics, and in particular in the security sector, because they tend, for at least us, have become very much an elite group, which tends not to have very much credibility on the whole.
Thank you. I think you're thinking of Libya too, aren't you? Bobolo has one, yes, Konstantin, then, yeah. Just 1 second, Konstantin's up, please.
All right.
In Estonia, if you wear a bow tie, you've got lots of power. So
Thank you very much. I'm Konstantin, I guess, from Moscow, and I have to nail my colors to the mast of this frigate. I actually think that the decision to leave Afghanistan is a complete disaster for which we'll dearly pay, all of us. But my question goes to Ambassador Ušackas and to Mr. Rashid. There are a lot of fears in Moscow, and that's a rare case when I probably sort of share them with President Putin, that after the international forces leave, this instability that Afghanistan will go through, no matter what, and it may not be a Taliban takeover, but still, will be automatically exported into Central Asia that Mr. Rashid has mentioned. To what extent do you think it's a real danger, or is it just some kind of horror bed stories?
Thank you. The microphone here. And then the gentleman, we'll take the last one, yes, from you afterwards, and then we'll go back to the panel.
Bobo Low, independent scholar. Vygaudas, you mentioned two factors that pushed you to at least a half-full view of the post-2014 situation. Ownership and leadership by the Afghans, and staying power commitment by the international community. What worries me about the ownership and leadership by the Afghans is that, in a sense, those who have the will to change things for the better don't have the power, and those who have the power don't have necessarily the will to change. But what really concerns me here is more the international community. You talk about doing more with less, but it seems to me that historical experience tells us that we always end up doing less with less. So I wonder here, and this is my question to all panelists, about the prospects of burden sharing, involving other players. So not just China or Russia or the United States or EU, but also regional actors like Pakistan, like Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, and so on. But if you had burden sharing, how would you go about achieving it? What structures and mechanisms might you use? Would you use something like an expanded Shanghai Cooperation Organization, or perhaps something within the framework of the Organization of Islamic Conference? But I'd be interested in your views.
That's the question they should have asked in 2001, don't you think? I'm just going to take this end, and then the gentleman with the red tie, and then we'll go back to the, yes, here, and then I think the gentleman in the red tie now speaking to his neighbor wanted one too. Maybe he's forgotten it. Sorry. But this gentleman, no, you don't? Okay, this gentleman, and then we'll come back to the panel.
I'm Hossein Bastani from the BBC Persian Service, in fact. I have a question for Mr. Rashid. You emphasize on the necessity of negotiating with Taliban. And my question is that if you are negotiating with the Taliban commander in a region, and the concession he wants is about, for example, the application of Sharia or the education of women, the things like that, should we give such concessions to them if it really helps the security of this region or not?
Okay, good question. I want to bring it back to the panel, and I'm going to start with you, Andrei, and each of the panels can respond. Some are directed specifically to people, but since you, what Konstantin had talked about, you had also talked about, but I'm going to give you a chance to reply as you wish to any of these.
First I would like to reply to Rashid's question about whether this
I think you should sit together at dinner,
mental
actually.
withdrawal from,
Yes.
from Central Asia reversible or not. I think it's irreversible because comparing with early 90s, it's strengthening by two new powerful factors. I mentioned already one of them. It's experience of latest traumatizing experience of latest Caucasus War. And the second one is migration problem, which is becoming very acute in the mainland Russia. It's impossible to have simultaneously neo-imperial ambitions and to restrict immigration from your former neighbors on Soviet Union. So it's necessary choice. Another was question about some collective strategy. Well, it's very difficult because take, for example, Russia, United States, China. All these three powers are threatened by Islamic radicalism. But they have different agenda. Well, during all this, especially at our morning session when you are flying in the air, I talk about irrationality and schizophrenic behavior of Russian foreign policy makers. Well, rationally, the Kremlin people realize that Americans are doing a Russian job in Afghanistan. But emotionally, they were gloating at every failure of NATO forces there. They tried to bribe Kyrgyz and Tajik leaders to close American base and so on. And as for China, I am asking myself a question. Maybe they just are waiting for this worst-case scenario I projected in my introductory remark when they were invited to Central Asia to enter there as final masters.
Okay, thank you. Vygaudas, you were...
Can I just try to match, Bob Law's question about burden sharing and Konstantin's about potential instability export? Yes, there is, such a danger, theoretically and practically. But the question is, how do we respond to that? And what I have witnessed in the course of over the last 3 years, a much greater awareness among regional players for the need to address it collectively. it's seldom when the EU diplomat quotes Iranian foreign minister, but I mean, I want to quote the foreign minister of Iran, and Carl Bildt was present in Almaty when Minister Saleh said, no one can solve Afghanistan puzzle, security puzzle alone. It will require international efforts. And we've seen steady efforts, first of all, by the extremely important initiative of the Turkish government, so-called Istanbul process, which turned into the heart of Asia. It's still very beginning. But I mean, you know, the Rome was not built overnight. The OSCE was not built over a year or two, nor the European Union. And it's, I mean, it's not something, I mean, we would expect to see the heart of Asia being like EU. However, there are some first steps being undertaken. I mean, China used to be absent from the discussion. Now China not only elaborates on the future, not only promotes investment, but even offered to host the next Heart of Asia ministerial meeting in China. They have bilateral consultations with India. I just came back from New Delhi. They also engage with Pakistan. And I think that's, I mean, Russians. I mean, we speak about Russia, but Russia is training every year 250 policemen across Russian universities. And they came to UPOL mission. I invited the Chinese, Russian, and Indian ambassadors. They were extremely keen to learn what European Union is doing through its comprehensive approach in security development and political support in Afghanistan, and offering to do something together, because there is a recognition that no one alone can or want to go back to the graveyard of empires.
Sorry, not empire nor graveyard. We have 4 minutes left. Ahmed, do you want to take the question you were saying about the discussions with the Taliban, and then Shukria about Allah's question about the diaspora?
Very quickly, I think it's totally premature at the moment to talk about talks between the Taliban and the government on issues of the constitution and Sharia. We should be aiming at talks which would bring about a ceasefire. We need to end the war first before we can move to the next step. So I think ending the war would create some issues of trust and confidence-building measures between the two sides, which could then help a political dialogue. On burden sharing, I think the most, I mean, that was the whole point of the regional compact. I mean, if you could get the neighbors to cease their interference in Afghanistan and then to help the peace process. But unfortunately, that hasn't happened. And right now, the Afghan mistrust of their neighbors is enormous, and vice versa. The mistrust of the neighbors for Afghanistan is enormous. And we're in a far worse situation than we were 5 or 6 years ago.
But can multilateral structures help that process?
But they already exist.
No,
but they're not really involved on the issue.
I think it's.
They did become more involved.
I think it's far too early for that. I mean, you've got to build some trust between the neighboring countries. India and Pakistan, China and India, Iran with everyone else. I mean, and the Afghans with everyone. I mean, unless you get that basic trust, I don't see how you can even use multilateral organizations. On Central Asia, look, a lot of these Central Asian Islamic groups are massing, if you like, in northern Afghanistan. Nobody knows exactly what their numbers are, or how strong they are, or how much have they penetrated in the underground in Central Asia. Have they laid down arms caches and all the rest of it? But I don't believe that they are as strong as they would like to be. And even though they're being helped by elements in the Taliban and Al-Qaeda and Pakistani groups, I don't think that they're going to be able to cause massive mayhem in Central Asia. But certainly, the danger is there. And the first attacks that will take place in Central Asia, and they will happen, either on Central Asian targets or on these convoys of American goods that are moving out of Afghanistan through the northern distribution network, they will create enormous political disturbance in Moscow and in Central Asia and in Afghanistan too. But I don't think that they will be threatening enough for the states. I think they'll be able to deal with them.
Okay. Yes. Shukria.
We are very optimistic for this Heart of Asia, which is functioning and existing very well. And for sure, we may see the result later on, not right now, is very soon. But the agreement that you mentioned, bilateral one, to be honest, in Afghan public mind, zero trust on Pakistan and Iran. If the APTA, Afghan-Pakistan Transit Trade Agreement, was been violated. How we can trust on the strategic partnership and beyond. Before Rashid says rightly that we don't have right now that income that we had in the king time. Why? Because the Pakistan's not allowing the Afghan goods truck to just cross the border and take the goods and deliver to the India. And thanks for those contributors, which is since long they contributed with Afghanistan. And having a peaceful Afghanistan, and I think this is all we wish. But how we can help, how we can support, it's just need a little bit more understanding from new Afghanistan. Because this is a totally new Afghanistan with a new message. And I hope you can hear and listen to that message.
And diaspora that Ala mentioned, I mean, this has been an ongoing situation in Afghanistan where lots of optimistic Afghans came back wanting to help their country, but some people had stayed through the wars. And
it's happening everywhere, but those whom they like to come and stay. The large number of our ministers are with double citizenship, and they occupy the better seats. They are contributing somehow. But if you ask all the seats to be occupied by those Afghans, which is they don't have enough understanding from the new Afghanistan, that's a different. But when it comes to the leader, what I really want to see Afghan having a national leader. Because unfortunately, since almost 40 years, we don't have the leader to be acceptable for all and entire people in the country. To not be ethnic leader, but just be a political leader to lead the country as the country and people deserve.
Yes, thank you. It's coming to the end. If you're going to give us something else to make us even more scared about the future, one last comment then.
A very short remark about date we are discussing, 2014.
Yes.
I think it was scheduled according to American internal political calendar. In hope that in 2016, Afghanistan will not be an issue during election. And after today's discussion, I am more inclined to think that it will be a very difficult issue for the Democratic Party in 2016 election.
Well, since we messed the Russians around today, I think we should let the Russian have the last word in the Afghan session. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, I think that everyone is correct, and certainly Ahmed Rashid mentioned it emphatically, that it's very, very difficult to predict what will happen in Afghanistan. Has anyone here in the course of our hour and a half changed their mind on their optimism or pessimism? Or you're going out with the same view that you came in with? They're too polite now, they're all smiling. I think it's undeniable that there is less international attention to Afghanistan, but perhaps that's not surprising after 13 years. But I think we would find it difficult to think that there will be an abandonment of Afghanistan. I think there will continue to be a commitment. The question is, given the state in which Afghanistan is now, whether it will be enough. But I think, Shukria Barakzai, wearing as always the color of the Afghan flag, you say you didn't bring a message from the Afghan people, but you have echoed what is said by many, many Afghans, is what they do not want to go back. And I think as the international community, the best that we can keep doing is to keep listening to Afghans and helping them as they, in an even greater way, will be in the driving seat. Thank you very much to all of you. Thank you to you, our audience. But don't go away. Another session is following immediately. Thank you very much.